Hello, my name is Nasiah Johnson, and today I will be presenting to you Bone China. So, you're probably wondering what exactly is Bone China? Well, it is exactly as it sounds. Bone China is a mixture of porcelain and bone. Basically, this makes it more durable and it does contain real animal bone. So its origins date back to early 1740s in England, and it was first invented by Thomas Fry. He created it in a factory, but it was perfected by Josiah Wedgwood. And the reason why they had to create this is because it was a booming industry with ever-growing profits, ever-growing advancements, and broadened horizons on economic reach, because this was a time where whole worlds were being introduced to one another. So they had to essentially keep coming up with ways to improve their craft. A lot of artisans had to adjust and adapt in order to keep their livelihood going. And they had to find newer ways to pretty much use less product and yet still create something beautiful and still create something vast. And that is because they could not afford to, waste as much product as they used to, and they could not afford to just be overzealous with their craft, because this was essentially life or death. This meant bringing food to their families and homes. This meant whether they were going to get paid or not. So yes, they were forced to adjust, and they started adding bone to create a better porcelain in order to basically conserve resources. As far as the process goes, it was a very simple, well, not simple process, but it was a very standard process for making porcelain chinas. So basically what they would do is take cow, pig, or horse bones. They would grind it up into a fine powder. Then after they would grind it up into a fine powder, it would be sterilized thoroughly by heating it up at temperatures at over 1,000 degrees Celsius. Then it is added to a Chinese clay called kaolin and a Chinese stone. Then it is shaped and molded, typically by using slip casting. And then it is refired at temperatures of over 1,200 degrees Celsius. And finally, it is glazed and goes through the glossed firing to melt the glaze, giving it its beautiful finished polish. More often than not, they would add the details and decorations after this, and then they would refire it at lower temperatures at around 750 degrees Celsius, and maybe just slightly higher, but nothing much higher than that. So, it was incredibly versatile. We know this. And because it was so versatile, it had a variety of uses. Ritualistic or everyday household items like cups, pots, pans, sauces, sugar, containers, all 9 yards. And you're probably wondering, what do you mean by ritualistic purposes? Well, it's probably not exactly what you're thinking. Their ritualistic purposes for bone china were not any type of sacrifice or any, prayers to gods or anything. It wasn't necessarily that. And you probably were thinking that. No. They used it as a afternoon tea ritual because afternoon tea was a very, very important ritual back in the 1800s. And so this was a social standing for many people. And of course, during this social event, many would use bone china in order to flaunt their wealth or in order to just demonstrate their etiquette and their formal dinnerware. And this most definitely helped show status because governmental figures, royals, elites, any politician, anyone with a status had more than enough money to buy and flaunt off their bone china or their fine china. Any type of china they could get their hands on to flaunt, they most definitely did. But in modern times, we typically do use bone china. It's just not in the same way we used to. In modern times, it's typically for dental reasons or lightings, like lamps and ceiling fans. Finally, I've added some pictures of bone china. If you look at the far left, you can see some of the beautiful teacups that were created from bone china. And if you look at the very top, you can see a whole set of dinnerware. And then if you look down to the very bottom, you can see on the left there is bone china, and on the right it is regular china, and that pretty much shows the difference because one is broken and the other one is completely intact. So yes, these are my examples and my pictures. This concludes my presentation on bone china. So thank you for listening and have a good day.